Leadership in Fractured Markets, Navigating the New Era of Geoeconomic Competition abstract. This article examines the emerging landscape of geoeconomic competition and its profound implications for organizational leadership. As geopolitical tensions reshape global markets through trade restrictions, investment controls, and technology decoupling, business leaders face unprecedented complexity in strategic decision-making. Drawing from international relations scholarship, strategic management literature, and documented organizational responses, this analysis provides a framework for understanding market fragmentation and its consequences for multinational enterprises. The article identifies evidence-based leadership approaches for navigating geoeconomic tensions, including strategic foresight capabilities, supply chain resilience measures, stakeholder management strategies, and regulatory navigation frameworks. By developing organizational capabilities in geopolitical intelligence, scenario planning, and adaptive governance, leaders can transform geoeconomic challenges into sustainable competitive advantages while mitigating risks in increasingly fractured global markets. For decades, business leaders operated within a relatively stable international order characterized by deepening globalization, declining trade barriers, and increasingly integrated markets. That world is rapidly disappearing. Today's executives face a fundamentally altered landscape marked by intensifying geoeconomic competition, the use of economic instruments to advance geopolitical objectives. Blackwell and Harris. 2016. The re-emergence of great power competition, particularly between the United States and China, has accelerated market fragmentation through export controls, investment screening mechanisms, data localization requirements, and competing technology standards. These forces are compelling organizations to reconsider fundamental assumptions about market access, supply chain design, innovation strategies, and stakeholder management. The stakes for organizational leadership could not be higher. Strategic miscalculations regarding geopolitical risks can result in stranded assets, supply chain disruptions, regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of competitive advantage. Conversely, organizations that develop sophisticated capabilities for navigating fractured markets can create significant value through enhanced resilience, privileged market access, and strategic agility. This article provides a framework for understanding the changing geoeconomic landscape and offers evidence-based approaches for leadership in this challenging environment. By integrating insights from international relations, strategic management, and organizational practice, we aim to equip leaders with practical guidance for turning geopolitical complexity into strategic opportunity. The geoeconomic competition landscape. Defining geoeconomic competition in the business context. Geoeconomic competition refers to the strategic use of economic instruments to accomplish geopolitical objectives. Blackwell and Harris. 2016. Unlike traditional geopolitics focused primarily on military power, geoeconomics weaponizes trade relations, technology transfer, investment flows, and financial systems to advance national interests. For businesses, this manifests in 5 critical dimensions: market access restrictions, tariffs, quotas, sanctions, and non-tariff barriers deployed for strategic rather than purely economic purposes. Supply chain interventions, government mandates on sourcing, domestic content requirements, and extraterritorial regulations affecting global value chains. Technology control regimes, export controls, investment screening, research restrictions, and competing technical standards aimed at preserving technological advantage. Data governance fragmentation, competing regulatory approaches to data localization, privacy, and digital sovereignty. Financial system segmentation, sanctions enforcement, alternative payment systems, and the instrumentalization of currency and investment policies. The convergence of these forces represents a fundamental shift from economic globalization toward what some scholars term geoeconomic fragmentation, Farrell and Newman. 2019, or The New Geoeconomics, Choa Maurice and Wiggle. 2020. Prevalence, drivers, and distribution. The prevalence of geoeconomic competition has increased dramatically since 2016. The Global Trade Alert database documented more than 723 new trade restrictions worldwide between 2017 and 2021, compared to 1,575 during the previous 5-year period, Evernet and Fritz. 2021. Similarly, investment screening mechanisms have proliferated, with 18 OECD countries introducing or strengthening foreign investment review processes between 2017 and 2022, OECD. 2022. Several structural factors drive this shift: great power competition. The economic and technological rivalry between the United States and China has fundamentally altered the global business environment. This competition has intensified across multiple domains, including semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence, telecommunications, and biotechnology. National security redefinition. Governments have expanded their conception of national security to encompass economic security, technological leadership, and supply chain resilience. This has legitimized state intervention in previously market-driven domains. Critical vulnerability awareness. The COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent supply chain disruptions heightened awareness of strategic dependencies, prompting governments to promote reshoring, friendshoring, and strategic autonomy in critical sectors. Domestic political pressures. Rising economic nationalism and populism have created political incentives for more interventionist economic policies in many countries. Geoeconomic tensions manifest unevenly across industries and regions. High technology sectors, critical infrastructure, personal data ecosystems, and natural resource industries face particularly intense scrutiny. Geographically, the most pronounced fragmentation occurs along the U.S. China axis, with secondary fault lines emerging around Europe, Russia, and various regional blocs. Organizational and individual consequences of geoeconomic competition. Organizational performance impacts. Geoeconomic competition directly affects multiple dimensions of organizational performance through both direct and indirect mechanisms: strategic complexity and decision costs. Research by Gemawat and Altman, 2019, found that 68% of multinational executives report increased resources dedicated to geopolitical risk assessment, with strategic planning cycles shortening by an average of 30% to accommodate greater uncertainty. These additional decision costs represent a significant organizational burden. Financial performance volatility. Companies exposed to U.S. China tensions experienced 4 to 7% higher stock price volatility compared to less exposed peers between 2018 to 2021, Wang et al. 2022. Trade war-related announcements alone produced substantial market value fluctuations, with affected firms experiencing cumulative abnormal returns ranging from -2.5% to -4.5% during key escalation events. Supply chain disruptions and costs. Organizations have faced rising costs from supply chain restructuring necessitated by geoeconomic fragmentation. A 2022 survey of 300 global manufacturers found that 92% had initiated significant supply chain redesigns in response to geopolitical risks, with average transformation costs equivalent to 4.5% of annual revenue, McKinsey Global Institute, 2022. Regulatory compliance burdens. The proliferation of export controls, sanctions regimes, and investment screening mechanisms has substantially increased compliance costs. For multinational technology firms, regulatory compliance spending related to geopolitical fragmentation increased by an average of 37% between 2019 and 2022. Citation needed. Innovation constraints. research collaboration restrictions and technology transfer controls have impeded innovation processes for many organizations. A study of international research partnerships found a 27% decline in U.S. China joint research publications in sensitive technology fields between 2019 to 2022. With potential long-term implications for innovation capabilities, Korea et al. 2022. Individual stakeholder impacts beyond organizational effects. Geoeconomic competition affects various stakeholder groups, employee mobility and talent management, immigration restrictions, visa limitations, and nationality-based security clearance requirements have disrupted talent mobility and recruitment. Organizations report increasing difficulty in global talent deployment, with 43% of multinational HR executives citing geopolitical tensions as a significant barrier to talent mobility. Deloitte. 2021. Customer experience fragmentation. Consumers face increasingly divergent product offerings, digital experiences, and service availability based on their geographic location. For example, app stores, cloud services, and social media platforms now offer substantively different experiences across geopolitical boundaries, creating customer confusion and dissatisfaction. Supplier relationships and small business viability. Small and medium enterprises in global supply chains bear disproportionate adjustment costs when navigating fragmented regulatory environments. A survey of automotive industry suppliers found that 38% of Tier 2 and Tier 3 suppliers reported existential threats from forced supply chain restructuring. Monica et al. 2021. Investor uncertainty. Capital allocation decisions face added complexity from geopolitical considerations. A 2021 survey of institutional investors found that 76% had modified investment strategies to account for geoeconomic fragmentation, with 54% reducing exposure to markets perceived as geopolitically vulnerable. BlackRock Investment Institute. 2021. Evidence-based organizational responses. Strategic foresight and scenario planning. Organizations that systematically develop geopolitical intelligence capabilities demonstrate superior performance in navigating market fragmentation. Effective approaches combine external data sources with structured internal processes. Geopolitical intelligence integration approaches, cross-functional, geoeconomic committees, with representation from strategy, government affairs, legal, supply chain, and regional leadership. Dedicated geopolitical risk officers reporting directly to executive leadership. Regular geopolitical briefings integrated into strategic planning processes. Partnerships with specialized geopolitical risk consultancies and academic institutions. Scenario planning methodologies. Development of plausible, divergent future scenarios based on key geoeconomic uncertainties. Quantification of scenario impacts on revenue, costs, and strategic initiatives. Identification of robust strategies that perform adequately across multiple scenarios. Early warning indicators linked to scenario triggers and response playbooks. Microsoft established a geopolitical strategy team in 2017 that combines internal expertise with external advisors to develop quarterly scenario analyses focusing on technology governance, digital sovereignty, and market access issues. This team conducts regular wargaming exercises with business unit leaders to test strategy resilience against various geopolitical developments. The approach enabled Microsoft to anticipate data localization requirements in multiple markets, positioning their Azure cloud infrastructure ahead of regulatory changes and turning a potential constraint into a competitive advantage. Smith and Brown. 2019. Supply chain resilience and restructuring. Evidence indicates that proactive supply chain restructuring yields significant resilience benefits despite transition costs. Research by Simcha-Levi et al. 2020 found that companies implementing geopolitically informed supply chain redesigns experienced 32% fewer disruption days during subsequent crises compared to reactive peers. Supply chain mapping and vulnerability assessment. Comprehensive visibility beyond Tier 1 suppliers to identify hidden geopolitical exposures. Geographic concentration analysis to identify potential choke points. Regulatory vulnerability mapping across jurisdictions. Scenario-based stress testing of supply networks under different geoeconomic conditions. Strategic redundancy and optionality. Selective redundancy in high-risk components and materials. Qualification of alternative suppliers across different jurisdictions. Production footprint diversification aligned with geopolitical scenarios. Strategic inventory positioning for critical components. Technology and process adaptations. Design modularity to enable rapid supplier switching. Production process standardization to facilitate geographic flexibility. Digital twins and advanced analytics to model supply chain responses. Contractual flexibility with suppliers to accommodate geopolitical disruptions. Unilever implemented a geopolitical segmentation of its supply chain beginning in 2018. Categorizing suppliers and manufacturing locations based on their exposure to various geopolitical risks. The company developed a dual sourcing strategy for critical inputs, ensuring that alternative suppliers operated in different geopolitical spheres. When faced with sudden export restrictions affecting personal care ingredients from a key market in 2020, Unilever activated its alternative supply network within 72 hours. Avoiding significant production disruptions while competitors struggled for weeks to secure alternatives. Unilever 2021. Stakeholder management in contested environments. Organizations face increasingly complex stakeholder environments where government, customer, and employee expectations may conflict across geopolitical lines. Research by Witold and Waddock, 2021, demonstrates that companies with structured stakeholder management processes for geopolitical issues experience 41% fewer reputation crises than those with ad hoc approaches. Stakeholder mapping and prioritization. Regular assessment of stakeholder salience across different geopolitical contexts. Identification of potential stakeholder conflicts arising from geopolitical positioning. Early engagement with government stakeholders on strategic issues. Scenario planning for potential stakeholder conflicts. Communication strategy development. Contextually adapted messaging frameworks for different markets. Consistent core principles with flexible implementation approaches. Clear internal communication protocols for geopolitically sensitive issues. Crisis communication playbooks for geopolitical incidents. Governance and oversight mechanisms. Board-level engagement on significant geopolitical positioning decisions. Clear decision rights for managing cross-border stakeholder tensions. Documentation of decision rationales for controversial geopolitical choices. Regular stakeholder feedback mechanisms to identify emerging concerns. Marriott International faced a significant geopolitical stakeholder challenge in 2018 when Chinese authorities demanded the company change how it listed Taiwan, Tibet, and Hong Kong on its website. The company implemented a structured stakeholder management process that included a cross-functional crisis team, scenario planning for various government and customer responses, and differentiated communication strategies for different markets. This approach enabled Marriott to navigate conflicting stakeholder expectations while minimizing business disruption and reputational damage across markets with competing political narratives. And Maidment 2020. Regulatory navigation and influence. Organizations that develop sophisticated capabilities for monitoring, complying with, and shaping evolving regulatory regimes demonstrate superior performance in fragmented markets. A 2021 study found that companies with mature regulatory intelligence functions achieved compliance with new geoeconomic regulations 40% faster than peers, reducing business disruption costs by an estimated 28%. Kerner and Schmidt 2021. Regulatory intelligence systems. Cross-border regulatory monitoring platforms. Early warning systems for emerging geoeconomic policy shifts. Impact assessment methodologies for proposed regulations. Scenario analysis of potential regulatory developments. Compliance program architecture. Integrated compliance frameworks spanning trade, investment, data, and technology domains clear decision-making protocols for geopolitically complex compliance issues, training programs tailored to different functional roles and geographies, technology-enabled compliance monitoring and verification, constructive engagement strategies, multi-stakeholder coalition building around shared regulatory concerns, technical input to regulatory development processes, educational outreach to policymakers on industry implications, public-private partnerships to address legitimate security concerns while minimizing economic harm. TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, established a dedicated geoeconomic compliance office in 2019 to navigate the complex web of export controls, technology transfer restrictions, and investment screening mechanisms affecting the semiconductor industry. This centralized function combined legal expertise with technical knowledge to interpret rapidly evolving regulations across multiple jurisdictions. The office developed sophisticated internal compliance processes, including automated tools to screen customer orders against various restricted entity lists and end-use controls. Through industry association participation and direct government engagement, TSMC also influenced the implementation of export control regimes to minimize unnecessary disruption while addressing legitimate security concerns. This approach has enabled the company to maintain trusted supplier status with both U.S. and Chinese customers within the bounds of applicable regulations. Chang, 2022. Building long-term geoeconomic capabilities, strategic flexibility and optionality. Organizations can develop structural capabilities for geoeconomic agility through deliberate design choices that preserve strategic flexibility. Modular business architecture. Companies with modular organizational structures demonstrate superior adaptation to market fragmentation. Research by Henderson and Clark, 2020, found that organizations designed around semi-autonomous business units achieved 23% higher performance in geopolitically turbulent markets compared to more integrated structures. Key elements include decentralized decision authority within guardrail parameters, regional autonomy balanced with global coordination mechanisms, distributed innovation capabilities across geopolitical spheres, interoperable but separable technology architectures, geopolitically informed capital allocation. Forward-thinking organizations are embedding geoeconomic considerations into capital allocation processes. This involves explicit evaluation of geopolitical risks in investment cases, portfolio management approaches that balance regional exposures, real options valuation methods that quantify strategic flexibility, stage-gated investments with clear geopolitical contingency triggers, strategic partnerships and ecosystem management, as regulatory barriers fragment traditional integrated business models. Ecosystem strategies become increasingly important. Leading organizations are developing partner networks that provide geographic optionality, creating alliance structures that span geopolitical divides, building joint ventures that satisfy local ownership requirements, structuring intellectual property sharing to accommodate technology control regimes, geopolitical acumen as organizational capability. Organizations can systematically develop geopolitical acumen as a competitive advantage through deliberate capability building, leadership development. Companies that incorporate geopolitical understanding into leadership development programs demonstrate superior performance in navigating complex cross-border environments. Geoeconomic, 2018. Effective approaches include executive education programs focused on geopolitical and geoeconomic dynamics, rotational assignments across geopolitically significant market simulation exercises involving complex geopolitical scenarios, mentorship from board members with geopolitical expertise, diverse talent and inclusive decision-making. Organizations with internationally diverse leadership teams make more nuanced decisions regarding geopolitical positioning. Research indicates that teams with members from multiple nationalities and political contexts identify 31% more potential risks and opportunities in cross-border strategies. Rock and Grant, 2021. Knowledge management systems, systematic approaches to capturing and disseminating geopolitical insights across the organization enable consistent decision-making. Centralized repositories of geopolitical analysis and precedent decisions, communities of practice spanning relevant functions and regions, formalized learning processes following geopolitical incidents, knowledge transfer mechanisms between external experts and internal teams, adaptive governance for geoeconomic resilience. Traditional governance structures struggle to address the speed and complexity of geoeconomic challenges. Organizations can develop more responsive governance approaches through several mechanisms. Board-level geopolitical competence. Research indicates that boards with dedicated geopolitical expertise provide more effective oversight of management strategies in fractured markets. Hennis and Zellner. 2021. Organizations are enhancing board capabilities through recruitment of directors with relevant government, diplomatic, or cross-cultural experience, formation of dedicated geopolitical risk committees at the board level, regular board education on evolving geoeconomic developments, structured assessment of management's geopolitical assumptions, ethical decision frameworks, as organizations navigate competing demands from different governments and stakeholders. Clear ethical frameworks become essential. Explicit articulation of core values and principles that transcend geopolitical contexts, decision processes that systematically consider impacts across stakeholder groups, transparent documentation of reasoning behind difficult geopolitical choices, regular review and refinement of ethical frameworks as contexts evolve, integrated risk governance. The interconnected nature of geoeconomic risks requires more integrated governance approaches. Functional risk committees with authority across traditional silos, joint scenario planning across strategic, operational, and compliance functions, integrated risk dashboards that connect geopolitical developments to business impacts, coordinated crisis response mechanisms for complex geoeconomic incidents. Conclusion: the emergence of geoeconomic competition represents a fundamental shift in the operating environment for global organizations. As governments increasingly deploy economic instruments for strategic purposes, business leaders face a complex landscape of market fragmentation, regulatory complexity, and stakeholder tensions. The evidence suggests that organizational responses fall along a spectrum from reactive compliance to strategic opportunity. Organizations that merely react to geoeconomic developments face escalating costs, strategic constraints, and performance volatility. By contrast, those that develop sophisticated capabilities for navigating fractured markets can create sustainable competitive advantages. Successful leadership in this environment requires new competencies and organizational capabilities. Strategic foresight systems help anticipate geopolitical developments before they manifest as business disruptions. Supply chain restructuring creates resilience against geoeconomic shocks. Sophisticated stakeholder management enables navigation of competing demands across markets. Regulatory intelligence and engagement helps shape policy outcomes while ensuring compliance. Perhaps most importantly, long-term success requires building enduring organizational capabilities, strategic flexibility that preserves options across geopolitical scenarios. Geopolitical acumen distributed throughout the leadership team. And adaptive governance structures that enable principled decision-making in complex environments. As geoeconomic competition intensifies, the capability gap between organizations prepared for market fragmentation and those still operating on globalization assumptions will likely widen. Leaders who systematically develop their organization's capacity to navigate this new landscape will be positioned not merely to survive geoeconomic turbulence, but to thrive amid the strategic opportunities it creates.